So with that, we have a few really interesting questions, but I think, something that you all touched on, but I think is really worth digging in a little deeper on and highlighting is, and I will ask this of each of our speakers, but how do you incorporate integrity and quality into your operations that aligns with CCPs? And this is really predating the development and introduction of the CCP program. And how is that aligned to help lead you into this sort of new phase of the voluntary carbon market? I think you all have a really unique, interesting perspective to share there. So I will just go based on my screen. And it looks like, Thomas, you are first, if you don't mind answering that.
Thank you very much for the question. Key here is to have robust methodologies in there, as well, transparent MRV systems, and 3 stakeholder inclusivity, environmental and incorporating environmental and social safeguards. So 4 key things. The first one is robust methodologies. We have the ICVCM approved methodologies, which are quite key here. So if you have robust methodologies in there, there are indicators that you have to meet, and in that score, you are able to incorporate integrity in whatever you are doing. When you have transparent MRV systems, you are able to get third party coming in to verify that as well. When you ensure stakeholder inclusivity, you're able to engage local stakeholders, especially indigenous people, local communities in the project design, the benefit sharing arrangement, and you're able to document the free prior and informed consent and grievance redress mechanism, and environmental and social integrity. You're able to align with the country approach to safeguards, the Cancun safeguards. Once you have your principles, criteria, and indicators developed for your safeguards, your environmental and social safeguards, all of these demonstrate how you can incorporate integrity in whatever you are doing. Also key is governance arrangements across from the national level through to the community level, and bringing everyone on board in that regard. So quickly, these are like key integrity issues and how you can incorporate them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Matthew, can you go next, please?
Yeah, similar vein, really. I think Triade has always really been involved in community engagement to the similar level. The change has been more about the evidence that you provide for that, and also the conditions under which those discussions are occurring. You are discussing more complex topics to do with market access and what an equitable agreement is. So you have as a developer, you have a responsibility to encourage more engagement and more in-depth engagement to explain these topics, because if you reach an agreement with a community who hasn't been fully communicated to how these things work, then that's not an equitable agreement, because they haven't been free, prior and informed. And that's the main thing for us, I think, is community engagement.
Absolutely. I think we can't underscore enough how important that is, and how much time, effort, work, collaboration it really takes to have these strong relationships, make sure that free, prior, informed consent is strong, and that you're working together. So I appreciate that. Joe, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Sean. I mean, I can add very briefly. I mean, for us, the climate finance for land-based projects of this kind is de facto development finance. That's what it should be. So we've always designed projects, and often in when we're collaborating in the same landscape with leading rights organizations who can guide us, and potentially protect or at least facilitate a conversation with communities. So you end up designing a project that goes way beyond the basic requirements of certification, because you're designing it to have development outcomes from the beginning. Now, when we look at the new requirements in something like VM48, they're not so difficult to meet. I think, this is the point. Not much will change. There may be some technical requirements, and I think recording what we do better, or in potentially different forms, may be the change that is required. But overall, if you're treating this entire enterprise as a development mechanism, you should be fulfilling those requirements pretty naturally, as a matter of course. So I think, echoing Matthew's point there, it potentially we have to get better at recording that, or framing it, but essentially that should be happening in any case, in these type of projects.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that's really important to just highlight and underscore. Sort of related to some of what you've all touched on when you were speaking earlier, but I think it's very clear that there's a challenge with particularly early stage capital and carbon finance investment. And I think both Matthew and Joe at TreeAid and Carbon Tanzania respectively, and then interestingly from the government perspective as well, what are sort of the challenges that you're seeing or opportunities you'd like to see more of regarding that earlier stage investment, given that there's so much resources that you all are putting towards these new developments in the market? With that, I wanted to add on, do you see, and again, we're in the early stages, so I'm going to sort of make a two-parter here, but do you see CCP impacting that? And additionally, if you can touch on your time horizons that you're looking at, because I think that's part of it in terms of, I see some questions in the chat about, when do you expect to register and issue your credits? And so, that is very much tied to when you start to see revenue generated from the development of these projects, but also how does that impact, the earlier stages of development? So sorry, there's a lot sort of tied up in that question. So please touch on what you think is most relevant. But maybe I'll start with you, Thomas.
Thank you very much. So for key challenges in the early stage development, as you alluded in your question, I think one key is the high upfront costs. You have to do baseline studies, stakeholder consultations, MRV design requirements, substantial investment before credits are issued. Sometimes methodological uncertainty. Developers may struggle to align with evolving CCP compliant methodologies. You may not even be sure about that. Regulatory ambiguities, some of these may come in, but how CCPs may impact these challenges. One, looking at stricter integrity requirements, CCPs demand robust baseline conservative accounting and transparent MRV, incentivizing quality over speed. So projects must prioritize long-term credibility, which can slow initial rollout, but improve market access at a later time. For instance, when Alex did his presentation, he said that there are so many methodologies, but not most of these methodologies have now been approved. It takes a longer time for some of these to come on board. Then access to, say, premium markets, CCP tax credits are more likely to attract buyers seeking high integrity, offset making early compliance worthwhile in the long run. So even though you could have high upfront costs, in the long run, this can be offset with access to premium markets in the long term. So balancing this out helps out.
Great, thank you, Thomas. Joe, will you go next, please?
Thanks. Yeah. Gosh, yeah, it's a big topic, isn't it? I think the issue, of course, is a very practical issue of when we can actually transition or even develop a new project based on data availability. In our particular case of RED, we are dependent on data being, and I kind of alluded to this, we're dependent on data being provided by Verra. That has to be contracted, and the host government has to approve it and essentially own the process. So we can definitely cooperate with partners, but we aren't, we're not in a position to affect that, and nor should we be. So timeline-wise, that means we're simply waiting, and our activities are contingent on that, and therefore everything that goes with that, i.e. getting the money that's required and promising potential buyers who might be willing to fund a transition. It depends on that. So, this time contingency does present, significant challenges for us, and that really ripples down to both the very local level in terms of setting expectations, and also even our government partners, who also have an important part to play in project development and implementation. What to say about that? I mean, if it's going again, if the market is giving very clear signals that this is the direction they want to take, and that by implementing this in a rigorous and comprehensive fashion is going to deliver high prices, then I would feel confident to go to the potential sources of revenue to bridge these gaps in timing, to provide the interim capital. So it really is massively dependent on understanding what the market is going to pay for these credits, and getting a very strong and as reliable as possible signal that that is going to be the case, like in so many businesses. So it really is this entire rather complicated set of contingencies that we're dealing with as developers.
Thanks so much, Joe. That's really helpful. And Matthew, anything to add?
Yeah, just a little bit to echo. I completely agree with Joe, what you said at the end there, in terms of, we all know that through these CCPs and through these methodologies, what we're doing has such a high integrity that it will justify a higher price in the market. But when you speak to investors and when you have engagements with them and you look at financial models, it can still be hard to sell that and to say, okay, so in that case, we need to receive more money to do it properly in the first instance. So, we do hear and a lot of people are talking about blended finance in these cases, and sometimes that can help you bridge that gap for project establishment in particular, in order to lay the groundwork properly, that you have more confidence in yourself, and when you're speaking to these investors, to say, really, we are going to deliver this and you can see why. But it's bridging that gap, like Joe said, about getting the project off the ground and laying that good groundwork.
Thank you so much. Yeah, often in our work at Ecosystem Marketplace, we talk so much about the complexity of just the life cycle of a carbon credit, right? From development, registration, issuance, transactions, which it can change many hands, to the ultimate, goal of retirement. And that can take years, and does take years, really, right? So, really underscoring that fact is, something I think we often overlook a bit in terms of just the complexity and the time horizons of this work for it to be, truly impactful. So thank you so much for those answers. I'm gonna ask two more quick questions. And Alex, I just wanted to touch on something with you. We actually mentioned this a bit in our recent State of the Voluntary Carbon Market report, but there's ICVCM has come in as a third party to provide a framework that helps buyers particularly, but also developers, sort of navigate definitions and frameworks around quality and integrity. However, there are also inherent project attributes that we talked about in our report, in terms of credit recency, removals, things like that are just inherent in a credit and a project itself. Can you talk a little bit more about other efforts and standards in particular who are trying to really enhance understanding and definitions of quality, or making improvements to their own program, whatever that may look like? Please just touch on it for maybe 1 to 2 minutes so that we can get one last question.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to fit this into a short response. But I mean, absolutely, I think, and we developed this work out of the research that we had done for the State of the Voluntary Carbon Market. We were obviously not affiliated with ICVCM or with any of these standards. And so this is something that we do because we see that this is influential in the market and we want to understand the impact. But as I mentioned really early on in the presentation, it is one of many complementary efforts to enhance integrity across the market. It's really focused on creating a minimal definition of quality for the sell side, doesn't really speak to the buy side of the market, what buyers are doing to decarbonize ahead of purchasing offsets. So that's something that's been tackled by, for example, the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, VCMI, another acronym with a lot of the same letters. And then individual standards might have their own initiatives. So, for example, like pioneering digital MRV, pushing for more benefit sharing and building that into the definition of the standard from the start. So, like these are all things that are separate and totally complementary to what ICVCM is doing, as well as things like third parties that offer quality ratings for individual projects. Like that is something that's totally complementary. And I think like really by looking at all of these dimensions, this is what's now giving buyers more confidence that they're actually purchasing quality credits with high integrity that fit their values.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex. And I see we still have quite a few people on the webinar. So I'm going to ask one last question that I think is really important and critical in terms of our understanding going forward. And then we'll wrap up. But there's so much interesting and important information to discuss and dig in on. And I hope that we have opportunities to continue this conversation in the future. But with that, just a last question I saw is someone wrote, it seems that CCP aligned credits are primarily developed to meet international standards for integrity and market access. For countries that are designing domestic carbon standards for forest carbon, what lessons can we take from the CCP process? How can domestic programs incorporate or align with CCP requirements to ensure both credibility and competitiveness in international markets? And I think this is someone who is coming from the perspective of developing domestic carbon programs in Vietnam. So I'd love to pass that to you first, Thomas, of in terms of the governmental management of carbon policy and engaging in different mechanisms. Obviously Article 6 is really, starting to take off. There's CORSIA in a new phase. And so what does this look like, or what lessons can be learned and taken away for government officials and actors trying to help develop and advance their national level policy and programming? And Joe and Matthew at the end, if you have anything to add, I would welcome that as well. But I'll start with you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. I believe at the heart of CCP, it's the principles of transparency, governance, sustainability, sustainable development, high integrity, and even looking at the Article 6, the global framework, it talks about doing everything in towards sustainable development and high integrity. And CCP is trying to operationalize that global framework or understanding. And I think as nationals, these are key principles that nations can transition into their local or national carbon crediting systems. And once they do that, whatever they develop at the end of the day would meet this global goal of ensuring sustainable development and high integrity in that. So regardless of it being a national approach, these hallmarks should be something that should be the objective or the goal of the national carbon crediting system: high integrity, sustainable development, and these are goals the CCP are trying to push. So just to tell the questioner that regardless of what the principles they're in are the key things that should be adopted in there as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with that, thank you to our wonderful speakers, Matthew, Thomas, and Joe. We really appreciate your time. To our audience, thank you everyone for joining. Alex as well, thanks. It's great to have you share your expertise. Sorry we're over, but I think there's just so much to talk about here that I wish we had another hour of everyone's time. That said, we will post the recording of this, the full 75 minutes that we did talk, with slides as well. And please reach out to us at info@ecosystemmarketplace.com if you have any questions or follow-up, and we'll do our best to connect you with those resources. So thanks again, everyone. Please have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.